listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Johnny Rashid.
I'm Rachel Sensenig.
I'm Julie Hoke.
And I'm Ben White.
It's good to have you here, talking to my colleagues here. Never called them colleagues before, but this is the first time for everything. Usually say comrades or something like that, but it's good to see them. And it's good to connect with you too. We're trying as hard as we can to connect with each other in all the ways that are available to us during this disparate time. We're 6.5 months into the pandemic, but we still want to love and connect and relate. And we kind of want to turn that up to 11 because it's so hard to do it. And so, more connection as opposed to less in this disparate time because the connection we have is less intimate than it usually is. Less physical, less in-person for sure. So I hope this podcast blesses you. And I think it will. We have a pretty good show here. We're going to start with Talkback, which the idea behind this segment is hearing people from our community talk back to us and elevating their voice.
Yeah, because that's how we extend the table of our dialogue. People wrote to us at Resist and Restore podcast at circleofhope.net. Thank you. We've been asking you to, and we are getting some emails in. We're going to talk about even a couple of them today. But just for the Talkback section, I just want to read one paragraph from one of our listeners in response to our podcast about Mother God and images of God and working with that. This is what the listener wrote. I've long resonated with our proverb that Jesus is the lens through which we read the Bible. I was really struck by what I think Julie said, which was something like, it's okay to not try to answer the question, referencing those questions raised, I guess, by Scripture itself and all the hard things in it, but also by life itself and all the hard things in it, as we try to live faithfully. Then Julie added, completing her thought, it's okay to just agree with the question. So if the question is perhaps unsettling, and answers don't come easily or well, that's okay. I suppose in one way because getting an answer can be hard too, because then you have to agree with it, or not. And what would that mean? Instead, we can agree with the question and maybe trust Jesus with it. That seems very freeing. Thanks for that.
Yay, Julie.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that was helpful. It's interesting to get that email this week because myself was actually having a similar conversation last night about how some of us who grew up in church grew up with a lot of answers being given to us. And people were wrestling with that and wrestling with their experience of shame and even depression and questioning of their faith as they grew up because of the ways that their questions were. There was no space for their questions about God. There was just answers, and then they had to do that reacting to the answers. Do I agree with this or not? And that binary really wrecks our faith, or can.
Or it keeps it small, I would say too. Like, I probably know a few people that have a solid foundation of that kind of like, I'm content with the answers that I have. And they might even be able to love Jesus in the midst of that. But more I experience people that come up against that either or, and they're out. And they're out even if they agree and if they disagree. Mm-hmm. And usually it's because a lot of the answers have to do with whether they themselves are okay or not, whether my personhood is right or not. So like we have this kind of perverse desire to draw the lines, even if we draw ourselves outside of the lines. Like I will take these binaries to the point where I cannot be a Christian because I don't have all the answers right. So I guess I'm just going to have God hate me. I'm just gonna put myself on that side of the line because I have to choose. How do I not choose? And that sucks. I don't like that.
It's really tricky because the wonder and the mystery and the openness that really can be a bedrock for faith to grow is really hard for people who are just encountering God to hold on to, because you do need something concrete at first, something that's black and white, something that even is in a binary. You need a basic understanding of what's going on. I mean, talk to teenagers. We're trying to give them they can't do the whole open-minded, mystical thing as well. At least I couldn't. I needed something, right from wrong,
Concrete.
But then eventually you grow out of that. And discipleship as a process of doing that is, I don't have a better solution to this than doing it together, doing it in community, doing it with others who have, walked down the path further than I have. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. To illustrate where you guys are going, I'm reminded of Job in the Bible and how, what sort of saves him at the end is not ever getting the answers, but being in this conversation with God. And I think we see that all throughout the Bible is, Jesus saying, remain in me and I will remain in you. I'll just abide. What does that even mean? It's so mysterious. But we're called into this conversation more than this list of absolutes or doctrinal creeds.
Yeah, and you were talking about this at the Sunday meeting this week, Johnny, about how time spent together is transformative in a way that we might not totally understand. It doesn't give us answers, but it produces transformation.
Absolutely.
You were talking about Zacchaeus in Luke 19, and something happens at lunch that causes Zacchaeus to want to transform his whole life and give 50% of his money away to the poor and to give back 4 times what he owed people. It's just this total renovation. And it's not clear what happened in that relating. And so if we're looking at Jesus being the lens by which we read the Bible, we really kind of ingest all of those personal encounters with Jesus, because that's essentially what the Gospels are. And we need to spend a lot of time with those. Mm-hmm. Spend a lot of time with Jesus in those in what is he doing? Because he's not doing the project that our listener is being freed from. Part of the freedom that Jesus provides is getting out from that kind of either or thinking, because Jesus doesn't do that either. And so if Jesus is the lens by which we read the Bible, and even how we read our lives, the encounter with Zacchaeus is one of, 3 or 4 dozen encounters that are recorded in the Gospels that are baffling.
Yeah. Ben, I think that's a really good call to spend time soaking in those stories of Jesus in the Gospels. One of my cells is doing that right now, and it's just we're just getting revelation upon revelation. But the soaking, I think, is what might help us to develop the trust that is so difficult. It's hard to trust the mystery in a scary world. It makes sense why our listener is trying to recover from that kind of answer-driven faith, is because it's comforting in a way to lean into. We want answers. We want concrete assurance, and the only thing that helps us out of that, I think, is developing this relationship of trust with God. And man, that's hard. That's going to take time.
But we're doing it. We're doing it ourselves, and we're doing it even over Zoom with cells. We're doing it at our Sunday meeting. Like I said, Johnny was talking about this just this week at circleofhope.net/online meeting. And we're trusting Jesus to even be the lens through which we have a Zoom meeting. Something bigger than just our limited connection is happening. And we're trusting Jesus to be in our midst, even in this pandemic. So connect with us online. You can even connect to a cell, even if you live far away. This listener is part of a cell, and he doesn't live in Philadelphia. Pretty cool stuff. Kind of weird. Totally. We live in a baffling time, and that might be good because it might get us off kilter and out of some of the ruts that we're in. So keep talking with us. Keep writing back to us at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. We'd love to hear from you and keep having this dialogue.
So glad you're listening to our podcast. I hope it blesses you and I hope it encourages you. And if you like it, give us a positive review wherever you listen. That'll help other people find it. And if you want to support us in other ways, you can contribute money at circleofhope.net/sharing. That helps pay our pastors and our communications manager, who helps put on the show. If you want to connect with us on Sundays, we meet at 5 o'clock at circleofhope.net/online meeting. Our worship meetings are online for the time being during our pandemic. We also meet in cells. If you're local, you can connect with a cell that meets outside, but right now, a lot of cells are still meeting online. You can find a whole list at circleofhope.net/cells, and you can pray along with us every day at circleofhope.net/dailyprayer and /dailyprayerdeeper. The first blog, circleofhope.net/dailyprayer, is for people who are just taking their first steps of faith, and the second one, /dailyprayerdeeper, are for people further along their journey, but it also is written by almost 24 different voices in our community. So if you want to hear from a lot of different people, check out that Daily Prayer blog.
Okay, so what are we calling this? I say even more talkback.
So it's another new segment?
No, it's just, yeah.
We keep inventing
even more talkback. Even more talkback.
To the listening audience, Talkback, if we had segments that you actually could keep track of, would you listen more? Would your review of this podcast, which I hope you're going to give us a positive review wherever you listen to this podcast, would that go up if we had organized segments? Obviously, you have to email me to answer that.
All right, well, for now, here's our new segment. It's called Even More Talkback. We got another email this week from a listener who asked some good questions, and we want to spend time with it. They said, I'm curious to know what questions you hold about faith currently. What are the things you're rolling around or wrestling with or holding that leave you with no clear answer or landing place? What are you desiring from God currently?
That's a good question.
Yep. What do you think? Who wants to get us started?
Well, I want to talk about the question a little bit more, though. Like, are pastors allowed to answer that question?
Absolutely.
Oh, because it's so vulnerable, Ben?
No, but it's also like I think it kind of goes to the previous talkback. Like we're traditionally our role for folks that grew up in a tradition where they're kind of getting stuck in that either or, yes and say the or yes or yes no. That's what I meant. Yeah, like all this kind of like, you know, like having the right answers is what faith is, and I get those answers from the pastor.
Right.
You know,
right,
so like
exactly.
If we say that we don't have answers, we're like, you know, melting the foundations of everyone.
Or
it's too stressful.
Or just being real about our own relationship with God. I think
letting God save us.
Yes.
How novel.
Isn't that our whole thing?
I think that is our whole thing. I just wanted to enunciate that, though, because it's not, you know, y'all aren't regular pastors. You're not the run-of-the-mill pastors.
Oh, thanks, Ben. That's
you're
how I
very
feel about
interesting,
you.
Oh, thanks.
You can always tell when a pastor is just too confident about what they're saying anyway. Like, obviously, we're dealing in things that are fundamentally bigger than we are. So a little space for some mystery and wonder and doubt probably is appropriate if you are worshiping, you know, the God of all, you know, the author of meaning, you know, like these huge, like, come on. And then you're going to write an 80-page manual about God. I'm supposed to believe you, you know?
I mean, I definitely find myself sounding too confident about these things. You know, that's definitely a default move when people are looking to you for an answer. It's pretty easy to slip into giving answers, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And I can feel comfortable in that space of like, oh yeah, I got something to say about this. You should listen. And everything I say, my wife gets mad at me about this because everything I say, I sound so confident. Like even though I'm not trying, like I'm just gonna say it, and like, you know, like it's, I mean, I'm not trying to sound that way, but I do sound like I'm like...
Your enthusiasm communicates confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah. I'm excited about, like, this sentence and the words, you know. Not necessarily the truth of it or the fundamental reality that I am exposing. I don't think I can do that.
Well, and these questions get at the ambiguity and just the relational aspect of our faith, that we're relating to God, even as we relate to those around us who have their own questions. So I think this questioner is opening that door a little bit more for us to share. Like, what questions do you hold about your faith? What are you wrestling with?
Something that has always been an issue for me with the Bible is the delay of the parousia. I like those words too. Parousia is a fancy Bible study word for the return of Christ, Jesus coming back. And in the Gospels, the way Jesus talks, and definitely in Paul's letters, there's this sense of apocalyptic urgency. Like, Jesus is coming back, like, snap. Like, it's going to be soon. Like, it seems like Paul expected Jesus to come back in his lifetime. And Paul's lifetime was a really long time ago. And that troubles me. It really does. Does it ever, do y'all ever think about that? Like, not maybe like, you could think about it theologically, but like, if ever I'm like, in a moment of doubt, I'm like, that's the thing that gets me.
Like, when is this actually going to happen?
Yeah. Or is it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I do wonder, like, partly I think because I long for it so much. Like, this world sucks. Like, there was a presidential debate last night when we were recording this. You know, I'm not sure when this is going to come out in a day or so, but like, it made me want Jesus to come back again. You know, like,
right now.
And almost everything in politics makes me feel that way. It's so terrible. Mm-hmm. The world is so horrible, and I just don't want to have to deal with it anymore. Mm-hmm. I wish it, you know, to live is Christ and to die is gain.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Ben. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, so, like, okay. I mean, I am going to roll up my sleeves and, like, keep working at it. And I think I have a purpose to respond to this mess, and Circle of Hope is a viable alternative, I think, to all this craziness. But it'd be easier if Jesus just, you know, said, "All right, good job. Time to stop exhausting yourself."
Well, didn't Jesus have the same temptation, too, in the garden when he's facing his death and he wants to do something else? He doesn't want to approach all the suffering that's before him. Christians are especially attuned, I think, and this is good, to the suffering around us. Like, I'm not suggesting that it wasn't a painful experience for most Americans to watch those two talk to each other, if you want to call it talking, the other night. But I think for people that have softened hearts, the suffering around us impacts us more. And that's a good thing. It moves us to compassion. But it can be tiresome. It can be weary, you know, and the temptation for escapism is there. But I think Jesus is calling us to keep entering into it.
In answer to this listener's question, I wrestle with feeling the need that I have to fix it myself. I mean, this is just kind of my default psychology, is that I have to make it work. I need to make it better. And I'm essentially alone in that. And of course I'm not. And none of that is true. And so, like, some of my earliest mentors in faith would just say things to me like, "You're gonna be okay. And Jesus is Lord." So I think I still can wrestle with that, like, primal fear, and I need to keep taking Jesus's hand out there on the water. And this is why I love the mystics so much, like Julian saying all will be well, and all will be well, and Teresa saying God is enough. I go back to their wisdom.
That's Julian of Norwich and Teresa of Avila. You should definitely know them. They're good friends to have.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they're Rachel's friends. She talks about them as friends. When I was thinking about this question, St. Francis' question came up for me.
Another really good friend.
Yes.
He's attributed with praying this question, who are you, God, and who am I? And it sounds like so basic in some ways to faith, but that's where I am kind of every day. I think I still wrestle with understanding who I am, who I've been created to be in light of who God is. And even when I maybe find an answer to that, I think the question is still right there again tomorrow. You know, when I bump up against other people's expectations of me, when I feel like I'm failing in my expectations of myself, who am I really, and who have I been created to be? Again, like you, Rachel, you're talking about your psychology and like early foundational experiences that shaped the way you work out your faith. This is so connected for me too. So I'll probably spend the rest of my life working on this. But it gives me comfort that I'm not the only one asking this question, and that I can embrace the question every day. And I serve a God who is alive and relating to me anew every day. I can keep desiring to know who God is, and hopefully expanding not just my understanding, but my way of living in light of that, in light of a growing relationship with God. So I don't know, that sounds vague probably, but maybe it speaks to someone else out there. So,
Well, to take it a little more concrete, Julie, it would be just a suggestion of that practice and that question, which Franciscans recommend to us through the ages since Francis was overheard praying it, is, and I did this for a season, and I'm thinking that, you know, it's resonating with me right now, and I might want to pick it back up. But I answered that question every day in my journal.
Oh, wow.
Who am I, God, and who are you? And I didn't repeat myself.
Wow.
And I really like poetry, so it would be like it's kind of like a slightly longer than a haiku is what I was going for. So I'm trying to say it pretty, and the mental energy of trying to do that, of trying to tune in, was really helpful for me. And you don't have to be a poet to do that, but to say something true, which I think is what poetry is about, by the way. Poetry is just distilled truth, and maybe attempting at universal truth through individual channel. Whatever. I don't need to define poetry. What I need to say is, try that out and try it out for a long time. You know, do it for 6 months, and do it when you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Ask that question and answer it.
Yeah, because it does require looking for a new answer. If my answer is the same every day, I'm just stuck in my own psychology or my own limitations. And I really do need to keep looking to God for a new answer and be made new as the new creation.
Oh, that's good. I really admire your acceptance, Julie, of like the long-term project of that. Because I can so easily get into, I need to like get over this or something. I need to answer this question and be done and have a new problem. And I think you're really tapping into the wisdom of like, we are probably going to go back to these foundational struggles for the rest of our life, because Jesus is going to keep revealing new layers of truth in here.
At every stage. Yep.
One of the ways that I keep my faith is by acknowledging that Jesus has a claim on me, that Christ made a claim on me. When I say claim, I mean that the way that I am formed, the way that I function in the world, the way that I live my life is because of my encounter with Jesus, my relationship with Jesus. And so God's revelation to me has inspired me to live in a certain way. And so I can't let that go. But when I look at my brothers and sisters sometimes and I see such different fruit being produced, I begin to wonder, what is going on? And specifically I'm talking about Christian hypocrisy around, matters of like police brutality and white supremacy, but also me and what I look like and how I'm treated. It's not only discouraging to me as an evangelist, and I'm not afraid of that word. I like to evangelize. I want to share the good news as far as it'll go. But it can be hard to do that in the soil that's been hardened by, I think, Christian hypocrisy. That's what people say about Christians. That's why. That's a number one feature of the church, sadly. But I think I can hide behind the difficulty that the hypocrites make evangelism. But what I really mean is the difficulty that they even make for my ground of faith. That it's hard sometimes to see such bad fruit being produced and wondering, how do I fit into this? Is this my family? What's happening? And I especially empathize with people who doubt because supposedly God's children are so hypocritical. And I'm not just talking about, being a sinner. I'm talking about a way of being. You actually think that the way you're living is a Christian way. It's not even like you're repenting of your sin. You think this is right. And it just seems so antithetical to what God has revealed to me. And I don't know how to reconcile that sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, last week when the Breonna Taylor injustice occurred.
Yeah, that really hit you, huh?
I mean, it hit me. It kind of surprised me how it
when
hit
they
me.
Couldn't hold the cops to account that shot 20 bullets into this.
Well, it wasn't just about the terrible laws, which of course are terrible, and you could argue about the case. But what hurt me was the rush of my Christian acquaintances to defend the status quo and to put my Jesus' name in their mouth while they did it. I was just so angry.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I could almost cry tears of anger right now again, just recalling that to mind.
Absolutely, man.
But I don't know. It doesn't. Certainly, we have different experiences, Johnny. Because for me, that kind of fires me up. That kind of makes me. That encourages me to be more Christian. Because it's like, oh, I got something to fight about. Like I'm kind of organized that way, and it's like I am not going to let you win on this. I am not going to let Jesus go down with your crap. Like I got to get to work. Like I need that. It motivates me to destroy those lies.
I feel similarly motivated most days, but I relate to the prophet Jeremiah, who predicted that Babylon would take over Jerusalem, and he served under 5 kings, 4 of which were bad. This is why it can be encouraging to read the horror stories of the Old Testament, because basically all the kings after the monarchy divided were bad. There were only a few good ones, So like
that's David's sons messed everything up. It was only good for 1 minute when David was king. That's the divided monarchy.
Consistent failure, So maybe the prophet's job is just to lament about, and like Jesus does in Matthew 23 when he finally the people that were supposed to be close to him end up killing him, and they end up their hypocrisy pains him, and so maybe part of the Christian vocation is to suffer with God and to suffer with and to suffer, To be honest, that's not like the greatest sales pitch for Christianity, though.
Totally.
Like, you're going to feel pain in new ways, and your passion and your love and your desire will lead you to even suffer in different ways. So I think that a solution for me, I say this a lot, I just couldn't be a Christian alone, I don't want to be dismissive of other people's experience, but if you threw me out into like suburban Pennsylvania and had me try to keep my faith, that'd be really hard for me. I need to go back to Philadelphia or the Philadelphia region here and find y'all again, or find something like that. It's really hard to do it alone. A hot coal isolated, burns out. It becomes cold. So, I hope that, I guess now I'm preaching, but I hope that this podcast touches you wherever you are and keeps your coal a little warm, because it's hard to do it alone. And I think if you're reaching out, you want something. I want that too. I want to be connected. I need to be warmed up because the world is The world's bad, and sometimes the worst people in the world are the ones saying Jesus' name. I mean, that's really discouraging. I'm laughing to keep myself from crying, you know?
So do we have time to add to this? What are you desiring from God currently?
I think if we make it like a haiku, we can get it in here. We don't, let's give our short answers for it is what I'm saying.
You could actually do a haiku.
Maybe. But it would mostly be clever, which I always worry my poetry is just clever. That's what I'm always working against, is just saying it so, and it's not actually revealing the truth that I desire. But whatever. I desire Jesus to come back, even though that causes me doubt sometime, to state it clearly, come on, Jesus, I'm ready. I want to see your glory.
I want to see revival, even if it's like in a quieter way than I imagine it. And sometimes I feel like I glimpse it in like little miracles, answers to prayer that are like often in and around our cell groups, like people bringing friends to cell and cool things happening when we pray for each other. But it would be awesome to see more of that and to see people really get healed.
Connected to my question, my wrestling, I've had a lot of time in this quarantine to reflect on where I'm at in my own development in a lot of areas, and I always desire to be further along. So if I'm really honest, I want to be further along. That's what I'm desiring from God, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of the church, for the sake of the world, the work that God has given us to do in the world. I continually come up against my own limitations and want to be beyond them.
I want to be seen and be known, and I want to see and know too. I think that God seeing me and knowing me, and God seeing you too and knowing you is hope beyond, gives you hope beyond what is around us. Right when Jesus shows up in John 1, he sees Nathanael under a fig tree. And Nathanael says to him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus says, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You're the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open up and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." So, if just seeing Nathanael under the fig tree caused all of that, I at least want some of that. See me too and know me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to our listener who wrote to us and asked this question. Keep writing to us. Your questions help to shape what we talk about here. But I also hope that it helps all of our listeners to keep wrestling with their own questions and holding their desires with God too.
For our last segment of our time together, we like to talk about what's been nourishing our soul lately. This is called Spiritual Show and Tell. So Julie, Johnny, Ben, what has been nourishing your soul lately?
I was a part of an event on Friday night that was nourishing to my soul. One of our compassion teams, the Circle Mobilizing Because Black Lives Matter, hosted an event that they called A Day in the Life of Racism. And there were 4 panelists that had prepared to talk about how racism affects them and shows up in their daily lives. And each of them shared in pretty vulnerable ways. And then we broke up into smaller groups with discussion questions to talk about it in our own lives. So it wasn't really to debrief what they said. It was to get us examining our own lives and talking about where racism shows up in us, in our experiences, and how we respond and what we can do. And it was nourishing to my soul because, first of all, just to have that kind of vulnerable dialogue is essential, I think, to my journey in being anti-racist. And it was so different than like reading a book or, talking about ideas. It really was practical and personal, and sharing that kind of vulnerability with others who, I didn't even know everybody in my small group, but it's freeing. And I think God is with us in that work, because it means, and it leads us to freedom, not just for me as a white person, but obviously for Black people, for people of color who are, we're all working at this, or at least, the invitation in this event was to work at this together. And it's almost like weeding. My job in my garden of weeding is never done. The weeds are always growing and always there. And they can take over without this continual tending of the garden. So this kind of open, vulnerable dialogue is like weeding. And it felt good to get into it with each other in a way that was not condemning and didn't leave us stuck in our own condemnation, but could get to some illumination and some freedom.
Sounds good.
We had a men's retreat this weekend that wasn't really a men's retreat because there's a pandemic and that sucks. But what we made for the Men of Circle of Hope to experience was pretty amazing. And it involved a hike in a section of the Wissahickon Park that I was totally unfamiliar with, most part of it. Well, the beginning part. So the thing that's nourishing my soul, the direct answer is Andorra Meadow. I had never been there before, and it's a beautiful place.
It is.
Yeah. And I was there close to sunset, and the light was perfect, and I took some photographs, and it was pretty great. But what it led me to was this book called Befriending Our Desires by Philip Shedrake, which I just began reading. And that was like part of the reflection of like we were on this walk, on this hike in the Wissahickon in this beautiful place, but we were also working on our interior stuff as we were doing this physical thing. Like that's a pretty good mashup for what it's worth, y'all. And working with that idea of befriending our desires as opposed to just shoving them down. Kind of typical for a man to do, to be kind of out of touch. I don't know if I always fit that bill, but I really enjoyed the first chapter of Shedrake's book, and I'm going to read the rest of it. And I appreciated the exercise that we were led to do during the hike that led me to that book.
How about you, Johnny?
When I was growing up, Sufjan Stevens was when I was in college in particular, a helpful artist who connected me to my faith. I think he has a gentle spirit and occasionally will write about his own faith in a way that I find encouraging. And in his latest record, it's really fitting for 2020 because it's somber, it's emotional, it's kind of has the weight of what I think is unequivocally a bad year.
Really?
I mean, I don't know. Like, if I'm reviewing 2020, it's not like it's not going super well.
The memes agree with you, Johnny.
But Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension is the album has nurtured my soul this week. And by the way, listening to music as opposed to podcasts full of bad news, good for your soul. You know, when I have my AirPods in, having music go through them as opposed to like miserable things from the news or oddly scholarly things that almost no one cares about. Yeah, I'm saying music nurtures me more.
That's a good insight.
Yes.
Also, you accidentally mentioned Air Bud, which is maybe you should check that out with Agatha.
That's the Golden Retriever basketball movie.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
How could you love that movie? How could you even say that? This is Rachel. This podcast gets released to the public.
I know. Listen, I'm a mom, and my daughter loves every single dog movie ever made.
Well,
no matter how cheesy it is, so I have to give him a shot.
I think Homeward Bound is pretty good. Like, isn't there a cat in there too? I don't know.
I don't remember that one. Okay, Rachel, what's nourishing your soul?
Yes, so our congregation added an outdoor Sunday meeting this week at FDR Park, and it was truly nourishing to my soul because we were together in person, and we were meeting under the trees, and we had just had people had been wanting to do this for a long time, but our cell leader coordinators finally kind of took it over the edge and helped make it happen. But we had so many obstacles in like actually making the meeting, like is often the case if you're trying to do anything, right? And so it just felt like a big victory to finally be able to do it. And after 6 months, actually worship together, socially distanced with masks. But we were together, and my friend Matt, during the talkback time, my friend Matt said something that I keep pondering. He said, it might be a tough winter in quarantine. How are we going to get through the winter? And he said, I keep thinking about Advent. In Advent this year, we're really going to embrace our hope, of our longing for Jesus and Jesus' return. So high five to what you said in the last section, Ben, because I think that longing is real, and I feel it, whether we're together or apart. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you join us next time.